Hey guys, it's time for the Saint of the Week. And the saint of this week is Saint Damien of Molokai. Well, Saint Damien of Molokai was born Joseph. That was his name. And he was born in the little kingdom of Belgium, which is in Europe north of France. And he was part of a big family. He had two older sisters who became nuns, and he had an older brother who became a priest and whom he admired very much. When he was 13, it was necessary, his family thought, for him to work on the family farm to help take care of the family. And so he had to stop school and work on the family farm. One day when he was in his late teens, he heard some priests come around and preach about Jesus. And he fell in love with Jesus and decided that he wanted to try to become a priest. The difficulty was that he had quit school, so he wasn't very educated. And priests have to go on and learn a lot of stuff beyond high school and college. And they have to go to school for many years before they're allowed to become priests. So it was very difficult for him to find a place for himself, to get himself accepted. But finally he did, because even though he wasn't really very well educated, because he'd had to leave school when he was 13, he was really, really smart. And he obviously was in love with God and would make a good priest. And so he was accepted and ordained. While he had been in the seminary and after he became a priest, he had fallen in love with a wonderful saint called St. Francis Xavier. And St. Francis Xavier had been a missionary. He traveled all around the world bringing the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ to people who had never heard of Jesus and didn't know anything about the Catholic Church. And Damien really loved and admired St. Francis Xavier, and he prayed every day that he could become a missionary and go to faraway countries and help people who needed help who had never heard of Jesus Christ before. And one day there were a group of priests from his order who decided that they wanted to be missionaries, and these four priests were going to be sent to Hawaii. Now, all Americans, or most of us, know that Hawaii is the 50th state. It's one of our states, even though it's a bunch of islands out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and not connected to the rest of the country. But back in those days, it wasn't a state of the United States at all. It was a kingdom, and it had a king. So it was a very wild place, filled with a lot of people who were very primitive, and many of whom had not heard the gospel. And those who had heard the gospel of Jesus Christ often had very few opportunities to live a Christian life. Another problem that they had in Hawaii, and this was a problem that there was all around the world in those days, but this is in the 19th century, in the 1800s. Another problem that there was all around the world, especially in warmer countries, was a health problem. It's a specific health problem. There were a lot of health problems that there were in Hawaii, and very few doctors and other people to take care of the sick. But there was a particular health problem that was called leprosy. And leprosy is a disease that you read about in the Bible, and you read about it in history too. What happened was you got this disease of leprosy, and then you would start to get scabby rashes on your skin, and the rashes would eat into your skin, and they would spread all around, and oftentimes parts of your body would swell up, they would crack and bleed, and sometimes things would even fall off, like part of your nose would fall off, or the whole thing, or parts of your fingers. So it was a very horrible disease, and people were terribly afraid of it. And if you read the Bible, and you read about lepers in the Bible, what they had to do when they were traveling around the Holy Land is if they were walking down the road, they had to say, "Unclean, unclean," which warned people that a leper was coming, and then people would stay far away. So lepers were very lonely, and they led isolated and difficult lives, and a lot of times they were sent off to their own places into a kind of exile or quarantine where they stayed together, but other people kept away from them. And as they slowly grew sick and died, their lives were very miserable. And as leprosy became more and more of a problem in Hawaii, the king of Hawaii decided that he was going to start a special settlement, which was isolated. It was on a little peninsula, a little piece of land that stuck out into the ocean on the island of Molokai. And there was a great, huge cliff at the back of it so that it was kind of cut off from the rest of the island. And this was going to be what was called a leper colony, a place where if you were found to have leprosy, you would be sent there almost like a prison, whether you wanted to go or not, because people were afraid that you would make other people sick if you were out in society in general. The king didn't really mean it to be a prison. He meant it to be a safe place, but there wasn't enough money or talent in Hawaii at the time to send proper food or medical care or to help the people build shelter. And they didn't allow people from other parts of Hawaii or other parts of the world usually to visit and then to return. Because if they allowed that, then that would mean, they thought, that those people might bring leprosy back and spread it around. And so the whole point of having a leper colony would be defeated. So, of course, Father Damien, as he was called, when he arrived in Hawaii, he heard about this colony, and he heard about the fact that the lepers had no one to help take care of them, and that their society was terribly disorganized. Worst of all, they had no priests. They had the Catholics there, and the people who might become Catholic had no one to say Mass for them. Because if you were a priest and you came for a little while, then they didn't want you to go back to the rest of Hawaii. So they were cut off from God and from the sacraments. So Father Damien heard about this. He heard about this, and he really felt called by God to go and help out in the leper colony. And so he managed to get permission to go and serve the lepers from the king and from his religious superior. When he arrived, he told the people gathered around him, he said, "I will love you. I will become one of you. I will die with you." He taught them that even though they had been cast out by the rest of society, God loved them, and they meant as much or more to God as anyone else on the earth. And he showed this by being willing to become one of them, to go to the colony and never return to normal life. Of course, when he got there, he had to build a church. There was no church, so he built the church with his own hands and with very little help. And he had built a shelter for himself, and he built shelter and houses for other people, and he helped to take care of the sick, and he helped the people to figure out how to grow food. He helped them to organize a society for themselves. He helped them to plan laws and make sure that bad things didn't happen, because before he came, the whole of society was just a mess, and robbing gangs wandered freely and hurt people and took their things. So he really brought structure to the settlement as a whole, which, by the way, was called Kalaupapa. That was the name of the leper colony on the island of Molokai in Hawaii. Father Damien, as I said Mass for people, and he heard confessions and baptized babies and did all the other sacraments. But there was no one to hear his confession. And one day a priest came on a big boat, and he stayed off the shore because he couldn't come to the colony, otherwise they probably wouldn't let him come back. So he stood at the railing of this big boat, and Father Damien rowed out to him in a little rowboat so that he could go to confession. And he shouted up from his little rowboat to up the high side of the boat so that everyone heard all of his sins. But this was the only way that he could go to confession, because the priest on the boat wasn't allowed to come close to him. Father Damien became famous all around the world for his work. and he worked in the settlement of Kalaupapa for many, many years. The king of Hawaii honored him, and many people around the world sent donations and loved him. They sent donations to the leper colony. And just as he had expected when he told the people, I will become one of you, I will die with you. Indeed, eventually he did get leprosy. And gradually it became harder and harder for him to walk or to use his hands. But he struggled because his purpose in life was to help other people. And so he pushed on as long as he could. And finally, he had to take to his bed. And in the end, he died. And this was sad news for people all around the world. Remember that he came from Belgium. And the king of Belgium asked that his body be sent back to Belgium so that it could be buried there. And his body was sent back to Belgium. After a while, the Hawaiians asked if they could have a part of his body to bury in Hawaii, and one of his hands was removed and sent to Hawaii for burial. So, one piece of good news is that now people don't have to suffer from leprosy like they used to in most places, because there is a cure for leprosy now. So, and the other piece of good news is that Father Damien wasn't just famous during his lifetime, but remained famous ever since then, and eventually he was declared to be Saint Damien of Molokai, and his memory lives on, and he lives on in heaven with the Holy Trinity. So, Saint Damien of Molokai, pray for us. Amen.